All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. Let's turn our attention right now to a story that is gripping the nation of the grisly murder of a Ukrainian refugee in Charlotte, North Carolina. A seemingly random attack on a transit bus last month. And now we're learning more that Decarlos Brown Jr. faces federal charges. This a post from Fox News as the man accused of stabbing the Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska to death while she was riding a train in Charlotte faces federal charges. Brown is charged with one count of committing an act causing death on a mass transportation system. Let's quickly take you out to the White House. Caroline Leavitt, prior to these charges being filed, being announced, addressing this tragic story.
Address the tragedy that has not received nearly enough media attention, the brutal murder of Irina Zarutska. Here are the facts that many outlets have shamefully and intentionally failed to report until President Trump drew attention to it. On August 22nd, Irina Zarutska was stabbed to death on the rail system in Charlotte, North Carolina by a savage career criminal. This is a public transportation system that many in the area use every single day to go to school and work. Irina was on the train that night traveling home from her job at a pizzeria, still in uniform from her shift. This beautiful, innocent 23-year-old young woman was a Ukrainian refugee who had recently fled her country for a chance at a safer life and a promising new beginning here in the United States of America. But tragically, a public transportation system in a major American city was more dangerous than the active war zone that she left. The president and the entire White House are praying for her family and friends during this unimaginably difficult time. But while we extend our thoughts and prayers, we must also seek justice for this crime and call attention to this heinous incident. Surveillance video of the killing was finally released to the public this past Friday. It shows the alleged killer, Decarlos Brown Jr., pull out a knife, get up from his seat behind Irina, and prepare to thrust a blade into her neck before the released footage gets cut. This is pure evil on full display. The most enraging and unacceptable part of this story is that her death was entirely preventable. Decarlos Brown never should have been on that train that night. In fact, he should have been behind bars. Decarlos Brown has been charged with crimes no fewer than 14 times, dating back to 2011, including for armed robbery, felony larceny, breaking and entering, and shoplifting. Brown had previously served 5 years in prison for a robbery with a deadly weapon charge, and he had also forfeited bonds 3 different times, twice in 2014 and once in 2023. Despite all of this past documented criminal history, when Brown was arrested yet again in January of this past year, a Democrat judge, who I will add was a strong supporter of former Vice President Kamala Harris, released this insane criminal once again without requiring him to pay any bail. He simply had to sign a written promise to return for his court hearing. Think about how crazy it is to ask a career criminal, someone who by definition repeatedly breaks the law, to just sign a written promise and come back again another day. This is madness. This monster should have been locked up, and Irina should still be alive. But Democrat politicians, liberal judges, and weak prosecutors would rather virtue signal than lock up criminals and protect their communities. And perhaps most shamefully of all, the majority of the media, many outlets in this room, decided that her murder was not worth reporting on originally because it does not fit a preferred narrative. Many of the journalists in this room spilled plenty of ink trying to smear Daniel Penny for defending a subway car from a deranged lunatic in New York City, but none of those same reporters lift a finger to write stories about an actual murderer. Here's the truth that every American must know. Too many innocent people across the country continue to pay the price of the failed experiment known as cashless bail that has been championed by the Democrat Party for years. All the way back in 2020, North Carolina's then Democrat Governor Roy Cooper established a so-called task force for racial equity and criminal justice. Sounds nice, but it's not. That task force was co-authored by then Attorney General and current Democrat Governor Josh Stein. It recommended, quote, reimagining public safety to, quote, promote diversion and other alternatives to arrest. It also advised to de-emphasize some felony crimes, prioritize, quote, restorative justice, and eliminate cash bail. Democrats in North Carolina and nationwide are consumed with pushing a woke, soft-on-crime agenda, no matter how many innocent Americans suffer as a result. Instead of aggressively prosecuting and locking up violent criminals, the Democrat-backed cashless bail approach lets these criminals roam free in our country to offend again and again. These reckless policies have turned too many of American cities into hunting grounds for career criminals who mock our justice system, drain law enforcement resources, and wreak havoc on law-abiding citizens. Enough is enough, and that is why President Trump is doing everything in his power by taking action to undo these absurd policies. The president recently signed a powerful executive order directing the AG to submit a list of states and local jurisdictions with cashless bail policies so that the Trump administration may identify federal funds that are being provided to these states and can potentially be suspended or terminated. President Trump firmly believes that to maintain order in public safety, we must incarcerate individuals whose pending criminal charges or criminal history demonstrate a clear, ongoing risk to civil society. This is a common sense and sensible approach that the vast majority of Americans agree with, and it's time for the Democrat Party to get on board with what is right. When these criminals are caught, they must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and be sent to prison, where they can no longer terrorize our streets. This is the mandate the American people delivered to President Trump, and it's a mandate he intends to fulfill. Staying on the topic of public safety, new preliminary data released today by Customs and Border Protection in August shows that President Trump has delivered the most secure border in American history. For the fourth straight month, 0 illegal aliens were released into the United States by CBP. Nationwide encounters are down 93%, below the peak of the Biden administration. Border Patrol apprehensions on the southwest border in the entire month of August were less than what was apprehended in 4 days in August 2024 under the Biden administration. President Trump has ended disastrous Biden illegal alien invasion, and he sealed our border in record time, keeping this central promise he made to the American public. With that, I will take your questions. Here in our new media seat today, we have Michael Schellenberger, who is the founder of Public News with nearly 2 million readers and subscribers. Michael, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And why don't you kick us off? Sure.
Thank you for making space for new media. Nice to meet all of you. It's great to be here. I want to see if you could give some insight whether the president is considering additional measures against Europe and Brazil, not just for censorship, but also for preventing political candidates from actually competing in elections. We've now seen in Romania, France, and now...
All right, just listening in there, Caroline Levitt, as she starts to take questions earlier on, and plenty about the grisly murder on the North Carolina transit system there, the Ukrainian refugee, a very sad video, and also talking about the recent release of some of that footage on the train, and it is very difficult to watch as we are now learning that new federal charges being filed. This from the Department of Justice, saying charges on the light rail attacker with federal crimes. Irina Zarutska was a young woman living the American dream. Her horrific murder is a direct result of a failed soft-on-crime policies that put criminals before innocent people. I've directed my attorneys to federally prosecute Decarlos Brown Jr., a repeat violent offender with a history of violent crime for murder. We will seek the maximum penalty for this unforgivable act of violence. We will never again see the light of day as a free man. Let's be joined right now on the ground in Charlotte, North Carolina by Fox's Chelsea Torres. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And so many people outspoken about this tragedy. Decarlos Brown there arrested 14 times previously. What more can you tell us? What are these federal charges about?
Sure. Hi, Andy. Well, federal officials actually spoke to media today, and they said they even spoke to the family of Irina Zarutska, the woman who was murdered on that train here in Charlotte. And they tell us that the suspect is going to be facing these federal charges, and that charge is going to be an act of violence on a mass transportation system.
More than 150 people move here every day. We built a city that people want to live in, but we can lose that all if we allow violent crime like this to go on in our streets. And I'm here to tell you, the federal government is going to save our city from that.
It all happened on a Charlotte light rail train, and surveillance video captured this gruesome murder. Irina Zarutska, who fled Ukraine just 3 years ago, is seen here wearing her work uniform. She had just sat down on the train directly in front of her killer. Minutes later, the killer, wearing a red hoodie, jumped up and stabbed Zarutska 3 times and then walks away. The video shows horrified passengers watching Zarutska as she bleeds and falls out of her seat. So this is the man charged with her murder. It's 34-year-old Decarlos Brown Jr., and according to records, he's had previous court cases in this county. You can see all of the different mugshots over the years. Brown served 5 years just in prison for robbery with a dangerous weapon. He was then released in 2020. But police arrested him again even just this year in January for misusing a 911 call. He was then later released without bail. In a Truth Social post, President Trump even blamed the murder of North Carolina Democrats, saying, quote, "Her blood is on the hands of the Democrats who refuse to put bad people in jail," end quote. The White House press secretary calls Brown a savage career criminal.
Tragically, a public transportation system in a major American city was more dangerous than the active war zone that she left. The most enraging and unacceptable part of this story is that her death was entirely preventable. Decarlos Brown never should have been on that train that night. In fact, he should have been behind bars.
And Andy, the FBI here in Charlotte even tells us that they pushed very hard with the U.S. Attorney's Office on these federal charges after they saw the surveillance video surface. And both departments are working to push for a maximum sentence on Brown. Andy?
Thank you so much. And obviously a very horrific, tragic story. And they said that Decarlos Brown should not have been on that light rail system that night. He should have been behind bars. And people are critical of the justice system in North Carolina, of the mayor of Charlotte. Have we heard any comments from any lawmakers like that?
Yeah, you know, actually several lawmakers around, several congressmen from around the country have even said that even today, one was saying that she should give up her seat. She should resign as the mayor. What's interesting is that the primary election is happening here today, here in Charlotte, for the mayor's seat. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this truly does unfold. A lot of lawmakers are also saying that, you know, this justice system truly did fail when it came to protecting the citizens around here. And when we talk about really protecting people, that's why the U.S. Attorney's Office is really focused, and the FBI is focused on these federal charges, because they heard that so many people did not want to take the light rail anymore. So they felt that it was it would make more sense if they bring these federal charges, so that way they make sure that people here are safe. Andy?
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Chelsea Torres there in Charlotte, North Carolina. All right. Great report there. And obviously this happening at the end of August, and really for the first time, seeing these images really changes the perspective on this totally random attack that happened there with the Ukrainian refugee there in Charlotte. And of course, Roy Cooper there also on social media saying the murder of Irina Zarutska is a horrible tragedy. We must do everything we can to keep people safe. Only a cynical DC insider would think it's acceptable to use her death for political points, especially one who supported cutting funding to law enforcement in North Carolina. So he's saying, I've been Attorney General and Governor, dedicating my career to putting violent criminals behind bars and keeping them there. It's time Michael Whatley and the GOP get serious in Washington about funding our law enforcement. I'll do what I'll do as a senator. So we're hearing from different lawmakers, plenty of them coming out on the House floor yesterday. We're also hearing directly from the president, Donald Trump, about this as he posted this video about this horrific murder in Charlotte, North Carolina on social media. Let's listen in.
For far too long, Americans have been forced to put up with Democrat-run cities that set loose savage, bloodthirsty criminals to prey on innocent people. Really very, very innocent people. In every place, they control radical left judges, politicians, and activists, and they've adopted a policy of catch and release for thugs and killers. In Charlotte, North Carolina, we saw the results of these policies when a 23-year-old woman who came here from Ukraine met her bloody end on a public train. And here's a picture of it. This is the picture of it. And this is a picture of the woman. a beautiful young girl that never had problems in life, with a magnificent future in this country. And now she's dead. She was slaughtered by a deranged monster who was roaming free after 14 prior arrests. We cannot allow a depraved criminal element of violent repeat offenders to continue spreading destruction and death throughout our country. We have to respond with force and strength. We have to be vicious just like they are. It's the only thing they understand. 24 of the top 25 most dangerous cities in America are run by Democrat mayors. 50 people were murdered in Chicago in recent weeks, with hundreds being shot. And it's time to stop this madness. The people of our country need to insist on protection, safety, law, and order. We have proven that it can be done because we did it right here in D.C., in District of Columbia. The capital of America was a bloodthirsty, horrible, dangerous place, one of the worst. And now it's a crime-free city, and we're going to keep it that way. It can be done. It can happen fast. All we want is, please, Mr. President, we need help. Chicago needs help. Other cities need help. We'll do what has to be done because we're going to make America safe again, and that includes our big cities. We're going to make those cities safe. Thank you.
All right, just listening in there to the president reacting to this deadly stabbing on this North Carolina train. It is now federal charges being filed, talking about crime, violent crime in other cities as well. And obviously earlier on today, we're hearing from different authorities there saying the incident was tragedy as they were looking, the federal government was, to bring justice for Irina Zarutska and her loved ones, and of course, filing these charges today. We're joined right now by former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Thank you so much for joining us. And they were weighing whether to push through these federal charges. What factors went into this decision, Nima?
Well, Andy, there's the legal factors and the political ones, and I'll start with the legal. North Carolina really has a de facto moratorium on the death penalty. It's still on the books, but state law requires a physician to be present, and the North Carolina Medical Board doesn't allow its physicians to oversee executions. So as a practical matter, they haven't had an execution in North Carolina for quite some time, almost 2 decades now. So obviously the federal system is different, and we've seen it in cases such as the case we talked about last week, the Vermont case where a cult member killed a Border Patrol agent, or probably more famously, though, Luigi Mangione, who killed the United Healthcare CEO in New York. Neither of those states have the death penalty, and you have seen the Department of Justice filing over the state to try to put someone to death. And I think that's what we're going to see in this case, because you have the legal considerations, and obviously the video is very powerful. Every murder is horrific and not justifiable, but this one is particularly savage and senseless when you see it. And of course, you have the political layer on top of it. When the president, the White House press secretary is talking about it, I can't help but notice there's a racial component of a black man killing a white woman. Obviously, we have issues of federal law enforcement in Democratic-run cities and the back and forth with the Supreme Court, potentially weighing in on that. They weighed on some immigration issues as recently as yesterday. So you have law and you have politics, and they're intersecting here. And I really do believe that the Department of Justice is going to seek the death penalty in this case.
And we'll get into that sentence in just a little bit, but you mentioned the key factor of this case, that the video evidence, that it came out just recently from this light rail train in Charlotte, North Carolina. This crime, this killing happened at the end of August, and it wasn't really talked about, especially in national circles. How important is this video in terms of moving this not only from a state crime to a federal crime?
Video is everything. We saw it, for instance, with Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. But, you know, back when I was younger, at least, you rarely have video of crimes. I mean, Rodney King was one of the most famous examples. But now with surveillance video everywhere and everyone having a video camera on their cell phone, we are seeing much, much more video. And that's what makes this case so powerful. It doesn't really change the facts, but everyone who's watching, seeing this completely senseless, heinous, horrific, violent video. I mean, it just shocks the conscience. And of course, everyone's talking about Brown's criminal history, which is extensive. Most serious being that armed robbery with a firearm. Now, I know his lawyers are going to try to point to some mental health issues to try to keep him alive. Apparently, he said he had metal objects or something controlling his body during one of his court hearings. So we're going to see what the defense does in this case to try to keep Brown alive.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm not going to show the video anymore because it's just so very difficult to watch time and time again. Obviously, the killing of this Ukrainian refugee, and you kind of imagine what she was going through to leave the war-torn home country to seek a better life here in the United States. You mentioned that they will likely try to seek the death penalty. How much will that mental health aspect, though, key in on this? How will the defense try to avoid the death penalty due to that mental health issues?
I think that's going to be the entire defense in this case. If you are a death penalty qualified lawyer, your entire job is to keep your client alive. And there's no question that Brown did this, and there's no legal or moral justification here. You can't argue self-defense, can't argue lack of intent. There's no real defense in this case. You can just argue mitigation at sentencing to try to keep him alive. It reminds me of for instance, the Parkland school shooter case, Nicholas Cruz. Again, no real defense there, but what the lawyers did is they pleaded guilty to all those counts of murder and the worst school shooting at the time in American history to try to keep their client alive. And ultimately, they were successful. Even Brian Koberger recently, again, pleaded to a life sentence. So I expect to see mitigation in this case. I'm not saying it's going to carry today, but that's the only possible thing you can do if you are a defense lawyer defending Carlos Brown here.
Of course, and we're also hearing from Pam Bondi saying you'll spend life behind bars, but there's also this conversation around all the mugshots, all the previous arrests of Decarlos Brown. You can just see all these, the run-ins with the law time and time again for all sorts of different crimes. In terms of the sentencing for this, will that up the sentence at all? It may not matter, but what does that factor in, the fact that he has had so many run-ins with law enforcement prior?
Well, Andy, it's certainly an aggravating factor. And I think the best case scenario for him is life without the possibility of parole. Obviously, this is a first degree premeditated murder. It's not going to be manslaughter. It's not going to be second degree. It's not going to be crime of passion or someone acting recklessly or criminally negligently. This was premeditated. This was intentional. This is murder. And under the federal sentencing guidelines and federal law, because it occurred on a mass transit system, it will be a mandatory life sentence. Really, the only question is, will Brown face the death penalty and will he end up on death row and be executed?
And there's so much criticism about how this individual, how this person could not be behind bars, but on that train that night. A representative from North Carolina, Tim Moore, posting this saying, I led a letter calling for the removal of the judge who released a 14-time offender who went on to murder Irina Zarutska in Charlotte. This tragedy was preventable. There must be accountability. North Carolinians deserve better. Is there any legal precedent potentially for that, to have an individual like a judge held liable for a crime committed by this individual?
Judges can't be held liable, but they can be removed. And obviously, there's a lot of criticism here. And, what I would say is it's really a failure of our justice system. So I'm talking about prosecutors. I'm talking about judges. When you're talking about the mayor of Charlotte or members of Congress, I'm not saying they can't do their job and make sure that individuals have the right resources, but really, it's prosecutors, it's judges, it's their job to put individuals like this behind bars. There's not much other elected officials can do.
All right, very good. I just wanted to ask you about that. Nima, are we missing anything in terms of this case? It feels like obviously a horrific tragedy. Are we missing anything? Is there anything else that stands out for you?
What stands out to me, this is part of a broader trend. Historically, murder cases were handled by state prosecutors, district attorneys, county attorneys, attorney generals. But we're seeing the DOJ step in, and I'm a former federal prosecutor. And, back when I was one under an Obama U.S. attorney and a Bush U.S. attorney, you wouldn't see federal murder cases unless it was a terrorism case or an elected official or occurred on federal land. But now, because of the seeming gap where people believe, certainly folks in the Trump administration believe, that state and local prosecutors aren't doing their job prosecute these cases, or certainly they're not prosecuting to the full extent that they can, you're going to see the Fed step in and handle many more of these cases. Certainly in blue states where they don't have the death penalty, I'd expect to see a lot more federal murder cases, as Pam Bondi and her attorney general have promised the American people.
And just to go along with that thought, do you think there will be an increase in that, maybe not for murder cases like this, but with individuals that have been caught so many times, arrested so many times for different charges? Will the feds continue to step in that regard? Is that something that they might begin to do?
I think so. I think you're going to see more prosecution, certainly in the immigration context. We're already seeing that. Obviously, there are individuals who are going through civil immigration enforcement. They're being removed from the country. But if you've been removed and you come back to the United States, you can be prosecuted criminally. We're seeing an uptick in those. Obviously, we're seeing a significant increase in prosecution of assault on federal officers, different ICE agents. But in terms of violent crime, absolutely, even short of murder, I do expect, and I am seeing, significantly more federal prosecutions, particularly in big cities like Charlotte and elsewhere.
All right, and then obviously the burden continues to expand potentially for federal prosecutors like yourself. All right, Nima, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your insight here on Live Now.
Of course, Andy. Talk soon.
All right, thanks so much.